Okay, next up is out-of-region use, and it's going to be Milton Mueller, Draft Policy 2014-1.
Hello, everybody. Time to wake up. So, do we have slides? We have slides. Yes, out-of-region use is a policy that's been discussed now for 2 meetings, and in earlier iterations it was turned down in a couple of other meetings. And that, indeed, is the crux of the problem statement for this. It always has been that current policy neither clearly forbids nor clearly permits out-of-region use, and yet it's happening. Applications are coming in. There have been proposals to limit out-of-region use, and they have failed both for practical concerns and because the community did not support them. So the next logical option, which the author of this proposal came up with, was to try to come up with a proposal that clearly permits out-of-region use. And we recognize that there were issues raised by permitting that needed to be addressed in a new policy. So this proposal would add a new section that simply states that ARIN-registered resources may be used outside the ARIN service region, and that such use is valid justification for new or additional resources. Then it tries to define what out-of-region use means. It does that in more detail than you have on the slide here. I would recommend reading that part of the proposal on page 6. And then it comes up with a very important limitation. It says if you are going to justify your need for ARIN resources based on out-of-region facilities, you can't also use them to justify resource requests from another RIR, the so-called no double counting element of this policy. In order to avoid no double counting, the policy tries to come up with some documentation requirements, and I won't read this through, but fundamentally it tries to set a threshold below which we don't have to worry about this documentation, and above that threshold it asks basically for list the utilization status of all resources of the same type held with any other RIR that is used or available for use within the requested service region. We would apply ARIN policy to the determination of efficient utilization or utilization thresholds rather than the local RIR's policy. So this policy has been discussed on PPML, and it was just discussed the day before yesterday at NANOG at the public policy consultation. And there were concerns raised in the staff and legal review. Staff and legal wanted us to clarify whether it is a whole registration or a portion of a registration that is referred to. They suggested that it might be inconsistent with ICP2, which is a document passed by the ICANN board about the creation of new RIRs. It asked whether this policy would make ARIN subject to laws in other jurisdictions. It noted that there are U.S. restrictions, legal restrictions in the U.S. that would be applied to ARIN on dealings with certain countries that are not in the region. And it raised, somewhat speculatively, the potential for additional government oversight that might be caused by this. The reaction from the PPC, according to the reports I have, which are secondhand, I wasn't there. First of all, that there was strong support for the idea. There are also people who said, what are you talking about? Why do you need to authorize this? Hundreds of U.S. firms are already getting non-needs-based /22s from RIPE, which apparently has no concerns about out-of-region use. There was some questioning of or resistance to the documentation that would be required by this policy, and some unresolved questions about how to best verify or enforce that prohibition on double counting if you don't get into these somewhat demanding documentation requirements. And there were concerns expressed about whether we were creating some kind of trap by even making a distinction between in-region and out-of-region use. So, we can continue the discussion.
Microphones are open.
Microphones are open.
So I have a question for staff, David Huberman from Microsoft. This has been talked about for quite a few years now, and the genesis, which is easy to forget, is that the staff were put in a fairly awkward position as it started to get more and more petitions for address space from organizations who operate outside the ARIN region, but were setting up equipment in ARIN's region to base the network, and then they were backhauling the traffic to their home countries for use in customers in their countries which are outside the ARIN region. Again, bad for staff, bad for ARIN. Really bad position there if the RIR system was to mean anything at the time. Well, it's now 2014, and we're just about out of V4 address space. So my question for John and Leslie is, how germane is that original problem?
Leslie, you're there. Are we still receiving the requests from people whose equipment may be located here, but their customer demand is entirely outside the region? All the time.
Okay.
So it remains an issue.
So if that's still an issue, then I think the real brass tacks here for this community, in my opinion, is the regional part of regional internet registry still important, or is that idea deprecated by current events? My opinion is I'm in strong support of this policy. The idea of RIRs make no sense to me anymore.
Well, I think the key reason why they're getting these requests is that the unevenness of runout over the different regions. And clearly if you have lumpy distribution of free pools, then you're going to get arbitrage or attempts at arbitrage across these free pools. Front Mike, and then
Donnie Roisman, Softlayer. So the internet routing table doesn't have any preference for IP addresses and region. It knows no bounds on geography or IP address. A number is a number. It works anywhere you announce it in BGP. I definitely agree this policy should move forwards. I think the RIRs should have the same take on the physical location of an IP address as the internet routers have. I think I agree there are concerns with the way the language for the double counting, whose policy, efficiency, utilization based on which RIR's policy. I think that definitely needs some massaging and rework. But I think I don't have any good constructive feedback on how to rework it, but I definitely think the policy should continue, and that use of IPs in a geographic region which is outside of where the RIR is actually located should be completely permitted and not restricted in any way.
thank you. The back mic.
This is Bobby Flame, FBI. I'm opposed to this policy for just a number of reasons. I think number one, the one that David brought up, but I guess we have a different take, is the whole regional internet registry system. At this point, are we willing to disband ARIN and, what it stands for and what it's doing? And this might be, something which would kind of lead to that. Also the verification. We heard from Leslie Nobile in the Barbados meeting when she was talking about companies from outside the United States trying to obtain ARIN IP addresses, and there were problems with that. How do we verify, outside the ARIN region? It would be more difficult, and that's something that is actually a good service that ARIN provides. Some of the other things is, are you willing to subject ARIN to outside laws, especially from OFAC countries, which does present a sincere legal issue? So these are reasons that this policy would have very serious repercussions.
Okay. We have somebody from online.
Marla Azinger, Frontier Communications. I have supported reasonable outside region use, as I have seen there are circumstances where it is more logical for them to use specific RIR IP addresses, but when it comes to the transfer market, I'm not sure this should be micromanaged. I will defer to and hope to hear from the companies that actually need this, like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, to state what is or is not feasible.
Well, how convenient. Mike Joseph, Google.
Speaking of Google.
I strongly support this policy. I think we all realize that an IP address can't possibly live in a particular region, certainly not a prefix. We have IP addresses that span circuits that cross regions. We have cloud computing infrastructures. We have Anycast. And today, we have many parts of our IP space that is held by an entity in ARIN's service region, but is used worldwide. ARIN's policy on this is something of a gray area, and in fact, ARIN's staff interpretation of this has changed recently. So I think this policy is actually very necessary. ARIN needs clear guidance as to what the community wants in terms of ARIN's interpretation of global use. Specifically, this policy recognizes that ARIN exists to serve entities in its service region, not to provide addressing for its service region, and that's a very important distinction. This policy doesn't change the fact that ARIN will continue to service entities which have a basis inside ARIN's service region. They'll speak English, they'll talk to ARIN, they'll deal in US dollars, but they'll deal with ARIN, their home RAR, for their worldwide needs. And that's an important aspect of something that many of us depend on. For those entities here who operate multinational companies or multinational networks even, it's simply not practical to try to get address space worldwide, and nor should it be. I can't put ARIN space on one half of a link and RIPE space on the other, but nor should I have to. The fact is, the RARs weren't set up to create private pools for North American companies to use for North American purposes. They were set up to create entities which you could go to in your own language, in your own region, in your own time zone, to be able to transact business with the RIR system. And this policy recognizes what's been happening for years now, but simply needs to be codified. So I recognize that there are some rough edges, specifically the fairness of the 22, specifically concerning the needs test for space outside of ARIN's region, and I'm confident that we can work through those. But this policy is extremely important to many entities in here, and I strongly support it.
Just FYI, we're closing the queues for the microphones. People who are interested in speaking on this should find their way to one of the queues. Thank you.
Front mic.
Matt Petak, Yahoo. I have a confession to make. I run a global AS10310. It was issued by ARIN, and I'm using it in other places. I noticed that this policy says resources. It doesn't say IP addresses or anything specific about that, which means that I've been in non-compliance or in the gray fuzzy area for a number of years. I'm concerned, as MJ was, about the specifics of the address requirements that are listed in here, but I do think the general case of large global companies like myself, well, like Yahoo, sorry, I'm not Yahoo, but we do need to be addressed and codified. Thank you.
If I could keep you there for a second, can I ask you about the documentation requirements and whether you find that burdensome or you have better ways of proposing that we enforce the no double counting requirement? Is that what you're going to ask me?
I think there is some work that needs to be addressed on how you would validate and verify that the same items are not being used to justify space in multiple regions. I don't think that what is codified in here adequately encompasses that. I would almost actually suggest that we bring first the notion of, yes, recognize that resources are being used outside of the region, codify that that part is acceptable, and then do a second attempt at, now how do we propose strictures on that and do those particular strictures separately from the notion of, yes, it's okay to do this.
I just had one little comment. Those of you whose number resources, ASN numbers, IP blocks are being used outside the region, don't run and hide. You're okay. The challenge we have is not with the usage outside the region. It's when someone comes up and makes a request and they say, this is entirely for use for supporting customers outside the region. Not some incidental use, not some amount, not split on my global network, but someone who comes out and says, I need resources entirely for use outside of the ARIN region. That has been problematic in, as we've said in the past staff report, in actually making that match ARIN's current statements in NRPM.
Heather?
A comment from Kevin Ott. Support, and I think many of the discussion points, especially Mr. Joseph's, can be applied to 2014-15 inter-RIR ASN transfer discussion as well.
Okay. Back mic, yes.
Terry Stummy, DEA. To save time, I'll just say, first off, ditto what my colleague from the FBI stated. But in addition to that, this says that ARIN staff would continue to require that all organizations requesting space would need to have a legal presence within the ARIN region. And we discussed this when we put forth 2013-6, wherein staff was unable to verify these organizations from outside the region. They would set up a shell company just to create a legal presence, but they were unable to verify who these entities were. That creates a problem for law enforcement when we need to find people in a hurry, when we're issuing subpoenas. In addition to that, I do believe it undermines the primary role of the RIRs to manage and distribute public internet address space within their respective regions. Let's see. Again, verification of these individuals is critical. It's critical to our ability to effectively do our investigations. So that's mine.
Ben, I am closing the queues in 10 seconds. If you need to speak on this, please approach the queues. 5, 3, 2, 1. Queues are now closed.
Yes, Jason.
Jason Schiller, Google. I generally support this proposal. I think there are some language that needs to be tweaked a little bit. I think the most critical thing that we need to fix is there's some text in here that suggests if you're holding space from another RIR, it's actually this last sentence on the paragraph on the screen, if you're holding space from another RIR, then that space will be judged as efficiently utilized based on ARIN policy. So that sentence reads, the report must demonstrate that all resources currently available for use within the requested service region are efficiently utilized based on applicable ARIN policy. I think that's problematic. I don't think that we as a community should be trying to enforce our rules on another region. If you're concerned about the utilization of address space held in another region, you should apply that region's policy. So one possible rewrite is to change that to based on the applicable RIR policy. I understand that's kind of a barrier for staff to be conversant in all RIR's policies. The other possibility is you simply dispatch with that test and you just make sure that double counting isn't occurring. And the way that you could do that is ask the applicant to list all of the resources that they have and how they're being utilized. And a quick scan could make sure that nothing that's being used to justify space in another region is also being used to justify space in the ARIN region. That might be another way out, but it's a less strict standard. The second thing I think we need to address is this letting little networks not have to show what they're using in another RIR region. Basically, the way I read this is if you need less than a /22 out of region, you're allowed to double dip. And I don't think that's what we want. And then the third thing, which was already in the previous slides as reporting from what came up in the PPC, I am a little concerned about this defining what is in use and out of use use of ARIN addresses. I think it's okay if you want to charge me more because it's more difficult to verify my customers that are out of region. But I am concerned that this could lead to other policy, and I would just caution against that. We don't want to measure, for example, efficiency for in-region different than out-of-region, for example. I think that would be a terrible idea. This policy is not suggesting that. But I am standing up now cautioning future proposers of policy that this would be a bad idea. Oh, I generally support.
Yes, back microphone, Marty.
I'm Martin Hannigan from Akamai Technologies. I do not support this proposal. I'm a heavy user of MDN. Effectively, every single, at least the way I interpret this policy, every single request I make to ARIN going forward would be subject to these draconian documentation requirements, most notably any. We already have Section 12 if we're concerned about nefarious activities with respect to the applications, and any is way too vague. My experience with ARIN would also lend me to believe that I would be the any case every time. We haven't had to specify one way or the other up to this point whether address use is allowed or not outside the region. I'm in the same boat as Matt. I apologize. I'm using my addresses all over the world because I can. They're globally routable and unique. I think that if this really is a requirement and people really do want to go forward, I think that we should solve all the problems that it creates before we move it forward, not afterwards. Thank you.
Mr. Farmer.
David Farmer, University of Minnesota, ARIN AC. I'm the author of this thing and trying to solve this problem. While I'm sympathetic to the idea that, hey, it's not a problem, you know, we haven't had to specify this before. The problem, the problem as I see it, is nothing to do with V4. It has to do with V6. People are deploying V6. They have global networks. Nowhere does it tell them, are they supposed to get their global resources for their global network from their home RIR? Are they supposed to get it from all 5 RIRs? They are left wandering in the wilderness trying to figure this out. They ask questions, they get cryptic answers. I'm tired of the the fuzzy nature of it all. This shouldn't be hard. You shouldn't have to have the secret decoder ring to know what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. So we need to say something in plain language. Now, that's a whole heck of a lot harder than it sounds. So we've got to figure this out, and we can't open the door. We can't just open the floodgates as for some metaphors that were used for some other things. So there needs to be some reasonable restrictions. We need to figure out, find some stuff. We're working on that. We're trying to. But the first sentence of the whole thing is really what we're about here, and then it's, well, how do we make that first sentence work?
Got it. Okay.
Thank you, Milton. Thank you.